On page 18, and Rabbeinu Avraham is telling us that the most important thing to know when you're ascending these paths of observance is to know which is the common road and which is the intimate road, and to know where you are. He says you can't be an ignoramus and consider yourself righteous. You can't not know anything and expect to be holy. You can't speak Lashon Hara but try to keep a higher standard of kosher. These are things that they're mutually exclusive. You can't do one if you're lacking in the other. You can get extra credit points on your test if you failed it. It just, certain things just don't work. You have to at least know the core before you're able to add on any bonuses. This, I'm going to say it again, goes against everything you're taught, not just as Jews, but as Americans and as people who believe in a democracy. The truth is, in Judaism, you don't have the right to just do what you want. That person says, no, I'm not on that level yet, or I'm not there yet, and that's okay, and you should accept me for being where I am. And I'll take on that extra stringency when I'm up to that level where I'm doing stringencies. Right now, I haven't yet ironed out the basic levels of observance, so leave me where I'm at. Actually, I believe if this mentality was taught, you'd have much fewer Jews running away from Judaism, because if the idea was no rabbi in the world is allowed to teach his congregants to be stringent about things until they're all fulfilling the 613 mitzvot on a basic level, nobody would feel threatened or judged for just keeping a minimal level of kosher or a minimal level of Shabbat or whatever it would be. There wouldn't be that kind of pressure going around the Jewish community. So people think that they're being so holy when they're trying to accomplish such a thing, and really they're not.
There'd be like some satisfaction. There'd be some like self-esteem among a lot of people. You know, it's just like
sure.
I know where I am, but I'm
very
happy,
good.
I'm moving along.
One of the first things about acquiring Torah, the Mishnah says, is how do you acquire Torah? Hamakir et mekomo. You have to know where you are. Be comfortable with where you are. No, this is where I'm at, and I'm not trying. It would give a certain sense of comfort and pride. It's kind of like checking something off on your list that I finished it. I accomplished this goal. Now let me move on to something different. This idea also would cause for a more balanced kind of Judaism to come out, and I want to explain to you what I mean. I just had this argument at my Shabbat table. I have a lot of arguments at my Shabbat table, if you haven't picked it up.
You do?
Sure. Someone told me that they kept Chalav Yisrael. I want to say Chalav Yisrael. Chalav Yisrael is a Jewish concept. It's found in the Mishnah and the Talmud that Jews only drink milk that has been milked in the presence of a Jew who's a God-fearing person. Period. So if you were to go to Joe's farm and he's milking his cows and you want a nice gallon of fresh cow's milk, you would not be able to buy it according to Jewish law because it's not milk under Jewish supervision. It's one of the few things that requires supervision in Jewish law. When the rabbis were codifying the Talmud, they tried to figure out, so is this a law, is it a custom, is it a good idea? What's the rationale behind this commandment of our rabbis? It's a rabbinic commandment. So there are two camps of rabbis, and they exist until today. And neither side is fair about saying that they both exist. Especially the other side. One camp says, this is not a logical law. There is something to be said, something spiritual, something magical, some hocus pocus that goes on. When a Jew is watching the cow being milked, then we are allowed to eat the milk. And if not, we're not allowed to. Doesn't make a difference what, doesn't make a difference who. There's no logic behind this rule. It's a rule. The rule is, we must have milk that is under the supervision of Jews. The second half of rabbis, and a vast majority of Torah scholars, said that this rule has logic to it. The idea is, we're not allowed to have camel's milk, or pig's milk, or I don't know whatever animals make milk, donkey milk, I don't know what animals have milk. So for us, we have to make sure that when the person is milking their cow, they're giving us cow's milk and not pig's milk. And in a situation where perhaps cow's milk is more expensive than another kind of milk, maybe they'll sell me half a gallon of cow's milk and top it off with some other kind of milk that's not kosher in order to make sure that they're saving money. It's a normal business practice. I have to make sure the milk is under supervision. So say the different rabbis, what happens if you know that this farmer only has cows in this farm? He only has cows. Doesn't have any other animal in this farm. So are you allowed to buy his milk? Group of rabbis number 1, what will they tell you?
No.
No, why not? It doesn't make a difference. There's no supervision. Forget about it. Group number 2 says, no, the only reason is I'm worried about there being kosher. It has to be kosher milk. What will they tell you? Yeah, you can buy this milk because there's nowhere else the milk could come from. Yeah. Now, what if you were in a situation where pig's milk or camel's milk or any other kind of milk was more expensive than cow's milk? And so there's no reason for him to try to give you something that's worth more than what you're paying.
How can you get pig's milk?
You milk the pig. I've never milked a pig. I don't know how.
I don't know if it's possible.
But Costco is trying to bring, they might already be doing it, camel's milk to America. That's their big thing.
Milk.
They wrote about it a few months ago. And their biggest problem is that cows produce in 3 days. Camels produce in 3 days what a normal cow does in a few hours of a normal day.
Oh.
It's a completely different kind of animal.
It's gonna be a lot more money.
Exactly. The price is it's an incredible difference. So nobody's going to sell you camel's milk for the same price of your cow's milk. It's not a good business proposition for them. In such situations, would you say that you're allowed to buy that milk? The first group of rabbis would say
No.
no. The second group of rabbis would say
Yes.
yes, because there's no reason
Even
to
if
worry
they're on
about
the
this.
same farm. Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
because
gonna be
what-
treating the camels like princes.
Very good, very good.
Sorry.
There's an exception to that rule. What if the farmers give me a gift? Like, oh, Dan, I love you so much. This is your birthday present. Then you might have to worry, because then he might actually want to give me something of value. And in that situation, I would have to ask or figure out or test or look. But that doesn't happen. Sprouts isn't giving you birthday gallons of milk at the store, so this is not really a problem that comes up very often. There are many other such circumstances. What happens if there's a person who comes to check every once in a while that it's cow's milk, but he's not actually there when they milk? He shows up once a year. Just a spot check. He'll surprise them. Busted, you're selling pig's milk? Sorry, get out of here. We're taking away our kosher certification. Is that good enough? Category number 1 will tell you, no. Category number 2, maybe. They might say that's a good enough inspection. And so what you have is, it's not true what they tell you. There's something called Chalav Yisrael, Jewish milk. Rather, there's one camp that believes the milk must be under supervision of a Jew. The second camp, for example, Sephardic rabbis, most of us, we don't use this word Chalav Yisrael. It's not a word. Rather, the word that shows up in Shulchan Aruch is Chalav Tahor, kosher milk, v'chalav tameh, non-kosher milk. It has nothing to do with a Jew that's watching it. So in that situation where I know for a fact that this milk is cow's milk, according to the second group of rabbis, it doesn't make a difference how you know for a fact, but once you know for a fact, or beyond the reason of a doubt, that it is a kosher animal's milk, you're allowed to buy it without any supervision. Obviously, the first camp would disagree. And what it comes out to be is that regardless of which camp you hold like, the stringency of keeping the first opinion, I only buy milk, and that's what you asked me about at Ralph's. I only buy milk that was milked under the supervision of a Jew, and I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but even Jews are not supervising that. Today they've got cameras, the guy's sitting somewhere in New York, and there's a farm in Pennsylvania, and he's watching it on his iPhone. So it's not even what you think it is when you say Chalav Yisrael. But imagine that it was. It's at best a stringency. At best, and at worst, it's a misunderstanding of halakha. And so I respect those who are strict about this. Fine, you can do whatever you want. You have the money, go for it. But when it comes down to is it allowed or not allowed, somebody would have to be out of their mind to tell me that milk that is just a normal OUD or a Chaf KD milk is not kosher. There would have to be an ignoramus, really. Oh, what about what you heard? I know what you've heard. You've heard that on a spiritual level it affects your soul. You heard this before? You've heard this, that if you drink the milk, so it's maybe not kosher milk. It's going to be mitamtem et halev. It's going to dumb down your heart. Like the Kabbalists do write, the Ramban, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, they both write that when you consume things that are not kosher, it actually has a negative effect on your soul, on your heart, and your spirituality, right? And that's true. That's true, but there's a rule. Those rabbis would never tell you that something that another rabbi holds to be kosher can dumb down your spirituality or can affect your spirituality. Yeah. When they're talking about pigs, about scorpions, about, I don't know, cheeseburgers. But something that some rabbis, Sephardim, say is not kosher and Ashkenazim say is kosher, nobody would come and make an argument to you that that's going to spiritually affect. It can't. It can't. It can't be that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh or the Ramban HaKadosh would tell you, oh, you see that other rabbi? His food is going to make your soul worse. It's not a correct assumption, and therefore those who perpetuate this myth are actually doing a big disservice to the Jewish people. So why am I telling you all this? Because I'm a Shabbat table. Now obviously it's after a meat meal. We got into a nice conversation about kosher. Myself and some people who kept this rule of Jewish supervised milk. Chalav Yisrael. And I said, I'm very impressed that you're eating in my house. I thought it's great, but if it was dairy, I probably wouldn't eat at your house. I said, this is an interesting story. So you see, because there's a halakha that when you come to another person's house, especially if they're a religious Jew, especially if they're a Torah scholar, you eat whatever it is that they serve to you. Because there's a halakha that respecting, especially someone who's a Talmid Chacham, or someone who's a Torah scholar, or at least a student of a Torah scholar, you go to another Jew's house, you assume that what they're doing, that what they're eating is kosher, that what they're serving you is kosher. To come to another rabbi's house and to sit there and say, your food's not kosher enough for me. That disgrace of Torah, of a person's kavod, especially of someone who does keep kosher, is a much greater prohibition than the doubt of maybe having a drop of coffee, milk inside of your coffee. That's a correct halachic formula. The formula is the milk that I don't eat at my house, but when I'm at another Torah scholar's house, even though I wouldn't eat this milk in my house, at his house I'm allowed to have it. That's a correct Jewish formula of halakha.
It's important.
Now, if you go to your Aunt Jemima's house, and she doesn't even keep kosher, so you don't use this logic of saying, oh, I don't want to offend her, so I'm going to have pork chops for dinner. It doesn't, there are things that are, I'm not going that far. But I'm telling you things that are a doubt. So you're strict about it in your personal life. You wouldn't violate the common road in order to achieve something on the intimate road. You would not keep an extra level of Shabbat if it came for the price of ruining your family or your home or your wife or your kids. Certain things, these are, it's sad that I must share these things, but they're truth. There's an institute in Yerushalayim that was founded by Rav Peretz's son. It's a Jewish psychology institute. And they have patients, and they also teach rabbis or other professionals psychology skills, the mental health field, under rabbinic guidance. So there's a Torah side to it. There was a Chassid, and I'll tell you his denomination only because it's important for you to know that such a denomination exists. There's a group of Chassidim, very good people. They do a lot of good for the world. They happen to have some strange ideas in their religion. Not my religion, it's their religion. They're called Ger Chassidim. Gur. This is the kind of Chassidim. I even have family that's a Ger Chassidim. In the Ger Chassidic group, you're not allowed, just like any other Hasidic group, you wouldn't talk to women before you got married, or girls, or that's all, right? Obviously, they have such rules as single men and women don't go to weddings. Because they shouldn't think about what happens when couples get married. So only married people go to weddings. They have rules, social rules, they're not religious rules, they're in their own social network. When a couple gets married, so most places they study with the rabbi, the woman studies with the rabbinate, they get some, Jewish information they need to know for when they get married, family purity, things like that. They have a whole other set of rules, which is we're Hasidim, we're supposed to be extra righteous. And for them, part of being extra righteous is, so even though you're allowed to be with your wife whenever she's not a nidah, we don't have those rules. By us, even when she's not a nidah, she is a nidah. You don't sleep in the same bed. You don't walk on the same side of the street. You never touch each other. They go so far as to when a husband and wife wish to be intimate with each other, that same rabbi who prepared them for their wedding, they have to get a dispensation first, a permission to be together. And so it's always how do they have like 20 kids? That's a good question. But the idea is in their social code is built in this idea that staying away from your wife is a very pious ideal. Now, you may be looking at this like, what? Our religion? People like that, we have the exact opposite belief. But we saw that Rabbi Avraham mentioned this on the page before, right? You can't tell me someone's holy if he doesn't have a wife because he does this. But there's certain things that have to happen. Why am I telling you this? Because it could be that the Ger Rebbe, in whichever planet he lives in, spheres that he travels through, this is what keeps him holy. But he has to be aware that there are tens of thousands of Hasidim that are living this lifestyle that probably isn't good for them. How do I know? I was with Harav Peretz, and he was red in the face. I said, what happened? He said he just got a phone call from his son. There was somebody he needed to meet from his psychology institute, so they came over to meet. It was a Ger Chassid in his 40s or 50s who asked Rabbi Peretz, he says, I'm not allowed to touch my wife because we have those rules. We don't touch our wives. So I was wondering, and he asked this, and I must tell you, you must believe me when he asked this as innocently as I'm going to say it right now. He didn't mean this in any malicious way. Since I can't touch my wife, could I have another woman whom I touch and hug and kiss, and then I'll be with my wife whenever the rabbi lets? And Harav Peretz, poor guy, Harav Peretz turned him into meatballs, didn't put him on the spaghetti, and he rimmed into him. And he said, you should go back to your rabbi and tell him he thinks that he's holding on to angels, but he's causing a generation of delinquents over here. It's because the Torah says we're allowed to be married, we're allowed to we're allowed to be together. The whole system is planned because we're human beings. There is no ideal in our system to live a life like that. And when you try to pretend that that's holiness, you'll find out that you think you're being holy, but look what kind of questions your Hasidim are asking me. They're asking if they could have another wife on top of their wife that they're not married to. That means that they totally missed the common road because they think that they're on some intimate road, which is the fabrication of their imagination. Now, why am I choosing an extreme example? Because it's not as bad as milk in your coffee. But we have a system today that is stressing, follow these intimate paths and forget about the common road. We're blatantly violating them because this is holier for us. And the effect that it has on Jewry is twofold. One is it creates movements of Jews that will try to tell you something to the effect of, look at those religious people. They're religious, they keep Shabbat, kosher, but they're scum of the earth. Look, they steal from people, and they're mean to people, and they don't accept people into their communities. So what does it do? They say, don't be religious, be spiritual. Because they missed the boat of spirituality. They're so religious that they totally forgot about the common road. And they're right. When they look at us, they're right. But they're not correct. You don't throw out the common road because everyone else did. But it's cause for a whole movement of Jews who they want to pray on hilltops, but to bring them to Bet Knesset where there's a Torah, they'll run away. But we've created those people because we've allowed for such a Judaism to exist. And then there's a second half. The moment we start to deviate from the common road, and we start to invent our own little paths in Judaism that contradict things in the common road, they ask me why there are women rabbis in the Reform movement.
Why?
Why? I'll tell you why. We are the ones who taught them that they're allowed to break the Shulchan Aruch. We taught them that we're allowed to go to a rabbi's house and have a higher standard of kosher than the rabbi. So why can't somebody break it to the other extreme and have a lower standard of kosher than the rabbi? We've taught people the Shulchan Aruch is not binding on you anymore. You can be stricter than it. You can keep more rules than it. You can add to it. So why can't you subtract from it? And that's why the Torah says in the same breath, the Torah says, do not add and do not subtract. The Torah says, when you add, you will come to subtract. The Talmud itself says this. Minayin shekol hamusif goreah. He who adds is always going to detract somewhere else. It's a path. Rabbi Avraham is telling us logic, it's common sense. But this idea must be nailed, hammered into the Jewish people back, because we're losing our religion to people who are pushing so to speak. It's not even the intimate road. You saw before how Rabbi Avraham described the intimate road. The world of bliss, of beauty, of utopian ideals. This is not, but they think they're following an intimate road. But you have to tell them, oh, you're so religious? You're so holy? So then why are you deficient in X, Y, and Z of the common road? That's a legitimate question to ask. B'ezrat Hashem, when we start to knock balance back into our Judaism, you'll find that less people will run away, more people will come running to it. And essentially, if you would ask me, so what's different about this community than every other community, is that this is our flag. we try as much as possible, all of us, to have a flag of we're not extreme in this direction and not in that direction. We try to be as balanced as we can and stick to the book as much as we can. And that goes in every angle, in every different direction. But really, it might sound like it's not such a novel idea, but we're a dying breed in the world today. Not just in the Jewish world, but in the whole world. You'll find people are running to extremes and staying away from a road that is common and has intimate paths when it's necessary. So I'm asking, let's continue to follow the words of Rabbi Avraham to continue on this path of prioritizing our road. What must we do, and what can we do once we finish doing what we must. There's all this. And by that, we must learn Shulchan Aruch. Any thoughts? Any?
Beneficence is at an extreme level.
Sure, but you see this everywhere. It's not just religion that you see
Yeah.
this. This is the problem is that the Torah demands from us.
How does if there's a central body of din, if you will, I don't even know what the correct words to use, of determining what different sects of Judaism and how can this extreme get so extreme?
So the answer is because there isn't.
Oh.
There is no central authority. I would actually just ask this question recently. So who's your pope? That's what somebody asked me. I said, my pope? I said, like, who's your, I said, that's a great question. Well, does he pay your salary? So I'm thinking here, wait a second, does the Vatican pay Catholic churches? It seems like there's a whole different network than what we're operating under. This is a different world. But the truth is that something nice in Judaism that we've allowed for a lot of individuality and self-expression and different groups to spring up, we've taken advantage of that system and we've kind of lost this central command. In the days of the Sanhedrin, it looked very different. It looked very different. You wanted to be Sadducees or early Christians, great, but you were going to throw you out of the community. It's not allowed in our community. I actually just read an interesting piece. I saw a rabbi who wrote an article, I never want the Sanhedrin to come back. I said, that's a crazy thing to say. We pray for it all the time. He said, because I never want there to be some rabbi who's going to tell me I can't think this way, or I can't eat this way, or I can't talk this way. And I realized that he doesn't understand what the Sanhedrin is all about. There's a book written by Rabbi Yonatan Halevy in which he says, this is an important thing for you to know. Yes, there is a rule. The Sanhedrin makes law. And if there were a rabbi, even if he's a great rabbi, who argues with the Sanhedrin, says, no, I don't like what you're doing, I'm doing my own thing. This rabbi is totally removed from the Jewish people. Where's your individuality and self-expression? So it is that such things didn't really happen. Rather, the Sanhedrin considered it too petty to get involved in what kind of kosher food you eat at home. It was too petty for them to, so do your chairs face forward in the synagogue, or do they face sideways? They weren't a micromanaging institution. Rather, they set national standards. They dealt with the big questions. And they allowed for a lot of self-expression, so long as you didn't deviate from the bigger picture of what Judaism was supposed to look like. And inside of that, there's a lot of room for color. It just means that there's somebody who's keeping a checks and balance system. And you're allowed to petition the Sanhedrin, and there are 71 people sitting on the Sanhedrin. 71? 70? What did I say? 70 people sitting on the Sanhedrin, and they're sitting there and they make decisions, and not all of them are just rabbis. Some have to be scientists, some have to be doctors, some of them have to be mathematicians, some of them have to be engineers. To sit on the Sanhedrin, you have to speak a number of languages, you have to know how to worship idols, all kinds of things you have to. It's a very worldly group of people. So to come up with some dry, rigid style of Judaism is actually almost impossible if we were to have a Sanhedrin. It would be the greatest thing that would happen to us, not the worst that would happen to us.
How many Sanhedrin they can create now? How many places? One in Australia, one in Chicago?
No, there's only the whole point of a Sanhedrin. There's only one.
But,
There are smaller courts that operate under the Sanhedrin. But you should know there is a Sanhedrin today in Israel. It's a mistake that we haven't. Harav Peretz is on the Sanhedrin. He doesn't like when I say that. He's on the Sanhedrin. It's an undercover Sanhedrin. They call themselves there's a word for it, nascent, N-A-S. Nascent. They're in waiting. Right. They're waiting for when the Jewish people will accept them to be the Sanhedrin. It's led by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, actually. So
Really?
he's the one who, founded by Rabbi Moshe Sternbach. Big names. Someone asked why was Rav Ovadia not on the Sanhedrin? I don't actually know his calculations, but there are also age limits to sit on the Sanhedrin. You have to be in a certain level of health and all kinds of things that have to be in order to sit on the Sanhedrin. So not everybody who we wanted to be on the Sanhedrin could have been on the Sanhedrin, but it would be a good project for the Jewish people to consider, because we need it now more than we ever do. And for this rabbi who said he wishes there was never going to be a Sanhedrin, I just feel bad for him that he doesn't truly understand the religion that he's a rabbi of.
Too many like him.
Right, and I would be just as disenchanted as they would if there are things to learn. Baruch Hashem, we're not. And you read about the beauty of a Jewish court system. We're going down to Shulchan Aruch. Barry, this is not a rant. Part of Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah, what time?
Okay. 25:27. But this is part of the previous discussion about the Sanhedrin. You read in the halachot of the Rambam how the courts operated. If two people came to court, one of them was wealthy, one of them was poor. One of them came with a $500 suit or whatever he came with, and then $300 shoes and a tie in his head. He was not allowed to appear in front of the Sanhedrin until he went and bought the person that he's up against in court the same suit and the same tie and the same shirt and the same hairdo. And why? The judges are not allowed to be swayed in either direction. And so either that man has to dress down, or he has to dress the other one up. On a simple thing, you just add, the court would say, we will not proceed until you match your standard, so we don't look at you as two different people.
But does the court know that before, or do they say that so that when they show up, they don't know which one was which one and which one?
They're probably very good. In the court, the judges didn't actually meet the defendants until the court case. So there probably was someone who made these arrangements before. But you have stories in the Talmud of a rabbi was riding his donkey to the court case, and there was a man who said, "Oh, Rabbi, please ride your donkey before me." He gave him right of way on the donkey roads. And they come to court, and the rabbi realizes the person who gave him right of way, neither of them knew each other, but he was one of the defendants in the case in front of him. And the rabbi would dismiss himself from the case and say, I have a bias because this man was nice to me. And so he would replace himself with a different judge. This is a normal, we find that rabbis would travel from one city to the next so they could judge people they didn't know. That way the rabbi of the synagogue is not judging his big donor versus somebody. These rules are beautiful, and if we would have a court that even would resemble some of them, the world would look like a different place.